On a dark and stormy night in April 1957, Argentine Colonel Carlos Eugenio Murray-Koenig led 4 masked soldiers creeping into a memorial hall. With political tensions running high, the monument stood guarded only by a dozing elderly caretaker. The team pried open the heavy doors and beelined for a coffin at the hall's heart. Using prepared ropes, they hoisted the casket and boldly exited to waiting accomplices who scrambled to load their prize onto a truck. The convoy vanished into the night toward a secret military base. News of the theft exploded across Argentina the next morning. Outraged citizens mobilized, marching en masse toward the presidential palace, demanding the coffins return, the demonstration nearly escalating into full-scale revolt. What relic could spark such fervor? The stolen casket contained Argentina's secular saint Eva Perón. Known to millions through the ballad "Don't Cry for Me, Argentina," often called the nation's unofficial second anthem, this controversial figure rose from poverty to become a working-class icon. Hollywood would spend 17 years debating which star could portray her. What alchemy transformed this illegitimate child from the slums into a Virgin Mary? Maria Eva Duarte entered the world on May 7, 1919, in rural Los Toldos. Her mother, Juana, orphaned young with brothers vanished into Argentina's vastness, became entangled with landowner Juan Duarte Sosa, scoundrel who kept her as a mistress before abandoning the family after 6 children. Juana poured her savings into a sewing machine, working dawn to dusk stitching trousers that couldn't feed 7 mouths. Eva's childhood became a gauntlet of sneers and exclusion. Schoolmates mocked her, neighbors scorned her. Though academically average, she showed early talent for impassioned writing and speechmaking. Her mother's constant refrain, "Education will break poverty's chains." At 15, Eva boarded a train to Buenos Aires on January 2, 1935. The glittering capital offered no welcome mat for the uneducated poor. She danced in nightclubs until groping patrons drove her out, then pursued acting, only to find theaters casting couches mirrored club life. Survival meant trading favors for bit parts and scavenging rotten produce at markets. Cooking required borrowing neighbors' stoves. The entitled elites she encountered, all surface charm masking greed, deepened her disillusionment. Her hard-won minor celebrity never erased these scars. In 1940s Argentina, split between Nazi sympathizers and American collaborators, Eva denounced both camps. While her acting skills drew tepid reviews, her working-class authenticity made her political commentary lethal. Democratic reformers took notice, introducing her to slums where poverty's brutal reality reignited childhood memories. These visceral encounters would redirect her life's trajectory. Evita made a pivotal decision. She chose to leave behind her aspirations of being an actress and applied for a job at a radio station. Although the initial salary offered was significantly lower than what she earned in acting, Evita believed that broadcasting held the power to genuinely change people's minds and influence public opinion. To her surprise, the moment she went on air for the first time, it felt as though she had found her true calling. Her voice, brimming with emotion and persuasion, resonated deeply with the audience, and she quickly became a nationwide sensation. However, just as her career was taking off, the country was plunged into turmoil. The 1929 global economic depression hit Argentina, a country with little industrialization with devastating force. Farmers went bankrupt on a massive scale, unemployment skyrocketed, and the economic collapse soon spiraled into political chaos. By September 1930, military officers staged an armed coup to oust the president. Hoping to avoid bloodshed, they raised the French flag in surrender. Yet, the new military government was soon taken over by the oligarchs, and another coup toppled the president, Castillo. The problem was, the military leaders had no clear plan for what to do next. A provisional government was formed, but they couldn't even agree on who should serve as president. Amid this series of governments rising and falling like dominoes, one military officer began to steadily climb the ranks and emerge as a figure of real power. That man was Juan Domingo Perón. Born into a middle-class family, Perón entered military school at the age of 15 and later pursued further training in Italy. At the time, Europe was a hotbed of political upheaval, with various movements battling governments and charismatic leaders like Mussolini rising to prominence. Comparing what he observed in Europe to the state of Argentina, Perón came to a realization. In Argentina, 5 civilian leaders had been forced to resign in disgrace, for military dictatorships had ended in failure, and 6 leaders had died prematurely. Looking at this string of leaders, Perón noted that they were all strongmen, elites, and self-proclaimed saviors, yet the country had been left in ruins. Argentina, once a developed nation, had become a shadow of its former self. Reflecting on this, Perón concluded that Argentina's fundamental issue wasn't any single leader or administration. The real problem, he believed, was that past regimes had failed to organize and mobilize the people. Detached from the masses, these governments crumbled at the first sign of economic trouble. To address this, Perón decided to take a lesson from Mussolini, albeit with a critical distinction. As Perón put it, he wanted to replicate what Mussolini had achieved, but without repeating his mistakes. Following a successful coup, Perón took on the role of Secretary of Labor and Social Welfare. Many dismissed the position as insignificant since it wasn't part of the cabinet, but Perón saw its potential. Through this office, he could directly engage with labor unions and build support among Argentina's workers. This, he believed, was far more valuable than a short-lived cabinet role. His strategy paid off. Perón simultaneously wielded military power and organized labor movements, granting workers higher wages and greater political representation. This dual approach quickly made him a highly influential figure, and workers began to see Perón as their champion. Meanwhile, Argentina's government continued its chaotic cycle of regime changes. During this time, Evita launched a special radio program dedicated to critiquing the nation's political affairs. Her sharp commentary and incisive satire struck a chord with listeners, and she became a beloved voice for the working class, someone who spoke out for their rights. Then, on January 15, 1944, a devastating earthquake struck Argentina. During a charity event organized by the National Broadcasting Association to raise funds for the victims, Evita met Perón for the first time. The two, sharing remarkably similar values and visions, connected instantly and quickly fell in love. Evita quickly became Perón's secret weapon during his campaign, using every opportunity on the radio to praise him and portray him as the protector of the working class. Her passionate endorsements helped Perón rise swiftly to the position of vice president. Once in power, Perón began implementing his vision, which later came to be known as Peronism. In 1944, just 4 days after the Allied forces landed in Normandy, Perón delivered a defining speech. He declared that the outcome of the war, whether the Allies or Axis emerged victorious, was irrelevant to Argentina. What truly mattered, he argued, was achieving complete economic and political sovereignty through diplomacy and military strength. Perón believed that both capitalism and communism were outdated systems. Instead, he proposed a third position, one that sought to balance the interests of workers and employers through justice and cooperation, while maintaining neutrality between the United States and the Soviet Union. Critics often dismissed Peronism as opportunistic or two-faced, but this idea of a middle path resonated deeply with many in Argentina at the time. In the post-war period, as waves of decolonization swept through the world, nations that had long been shaped by colonial powers struggled to redefine their systems. For Argentina, where feudal estates and agricultural elites dominated, Perón's approach of fostering national independence through gradual development and class collaboration struck a chord with both the working class and nationalist capitalists. However, not everyone supported Perón. Pro-American capitalists in Argentina sought to remove him from power. On October 12, 1944, as Perón and Evita were having dinner at home, the military stormed in and arrested him, sending him to Martín García Island, a naval prison. It seemed likely that Perón's fate would mirror that of other ousted leaders who met untimely deaths. But from the moment he was taken, Evita remained calm and strategic. She assessed the situation while the military had staged a coup and seized control of the radio stations. The power of the unions still rested firmly in her hands. She decided to mobilize the workers. Traveling tirelessly from one factory to another, she rallied the laborers, urging them to fight for their rights and for Perón, who had been their advocate. She told them to fight for Perón is to fight for yourselves. Within days, on October 17, 1944, waves of workers from the outskirts of Buenos Aires marched into the city. They flooded the streets, chanting, "Bring back Perón." Some radicals smashed windows of government buildings and threatened to punish Perón's opponents. Factories across Buenos Aires ground to a halt, transportation ceased, and the city was plunged into darkness as electricity was cut off. The chaos underscored the power of the workers, leaving the military leaders paralyzed with fear and indecision. They didn't even dare to deploy troops for a crackdown. Instead, they attempted negotiations, but the workers were resolute. They demanded Perón's release or threatened civil war. The military, recognizing its own internal divisions, capitulated within a week. When Perón and Evita walked hand in hand onto the balcony of the Casa Rosada, the crowd below erupted in deafening cheers, their voices hoarse from days of protest. This dramatic reversal of fortune remains one of the rare instances in Latin American history where a coup was successfully overturned by popular mobilization. The very next day, Perón proposed to Evita. On February 24, 1946, Perón was elected president of Argentina, and 27-year-old Evita became the nation's first lady. After assuming office, Perón's first major move was to nationalize the Argentine Central Bank, which had previously been under the control of foreign banking representatives. He then invested heavily to reclaim critical infrastructure, purchasing the telephone network from the British and the railway system from the Americans. At first glance, these actions might seem like a shift toward communism, but that was far from the case. Take land reform as an example. During his first 4 years in power, Perón redeemed and redistributed 450,000 hectares of land to 3,200 households. However, this was a drop in the ocean compared to the over 1 million landless farmers in Argentina. The large estate system remained intact, as Perón had no intention of dismantling it. Furthermore, despite being in power, the actual control of Argentina's economy remained in the hands of the elite oligarchy. The government pressured these elites to make concessions to workers, ensuring appearances of fairness, but no substantial power was taken from them. At the same time, Perón curtailed press freedom, consolidating control over the media, and suppressed communist ideology. For instance, a member of the Argentine Communist Party named Fernando was arrested for promoting communism and imprisoned for 7 months. Interestingly, one of Fernando's acquaintances during his university years was Ernesto Guevara, later known as Che Guevara. Internationally, Perón faced immense challenges. During the Cold War, proposing a third way between capitalism and socialism was akin to courting disaster. Leaders like India's Nehru and Egypt's Nasser had attempted similar paths and failed. By all accounts, Perón's government seemed destined for a short lifespan, yet Evita played a crucial role in prolonging its survival. Together, she and Perón established the foundation Eva Perón, which used funds extracted from the wealthy and opposition groups to provide welfare for workers, aid orphans, and improve public living conditions. Evita personally visited impoverished areas, listened to workers' grievances, and gave motivational speeches. To the working class, she wasn't just the first lady, she was their advocate and a symbol of hope. This unique dynamic allowed Perón's government to persist in a precarious balance without significantly altering the entrenched power of the oligarchy. However, the turning point for Perón's regime came with Evita's illness. In 1951, she was diagnosed with uterine cancer, and despite undergoing surgery by the nation's top doctors, her condition deteriorated rapidly. Even in her final days, Evita remained devoted to Perón. She authored a memoir titled My Mission in Life, where the majority of its pages were dedicated to praising her husband. Interestingly, this book faced resistance from American publishers, who refused to release it in the United States. This rejection angered the Argentine public so much that 2 bombs were detonated at the U.S. Information Service in Buenos Aires. On May Day in 1952, Evita delivered a poignant farewell to over 300,000 workers gathered in Plaza de Mayo. This moment was immortalized in the film adaptation of her life, where Madonna, portraying Evita, famously sang "Don't Cry for Me, Argentina." On July 26, 1952, Evita passed away at just 33 years old. Her funeral was conducted with the honors reserved for a head of state. The 6 million members of the unions she had helped organize donated a day's wages to build monuments in her memory. The outpouring of grief was overwhelming. Crowds swarmed to pay their respects, resulting in over 2,000 injuries from the crush of mourners. The government had to deploy military forces to maintain order as countless people tried to touch or kiss her coffin. Evita's death marked a turning point for Perón's government. Unwilling to entrust leadership of the union's 6 million members to anyone else, Perón struggled to maintain the delicate balance of power. Combined with the depletion of Argentina's gold reserves due to prior welfare policies, Perón was forced to seek alternative sources of funding. While Evita had fiercely opposed U.S. interference in Argentina, within 6 months of her death, Perón shifted his stance and began aligning with the United States. By January 1955, he allowed American companies unrestricted access to Argentina's markets. By April, Mobil Oil had begun extracting petroleum in the country. In Córdoba province, Kaiser Industries set up an automobile factory, but the move to open up the economy to foreign investment failed to deliver the desired results. Inflation surged, wages stagnated, and workers across Argentina grew increasingly disillusioned. Meanwhile, the military, always lurking in the political shadows, began to stir once again. In June 1955, the Navy staged a coup, but President Perón narrowly escaped thanks to a timely warning from the United States. However, by this point, Perón was hesitant to mobilize the masses as he had in the past. He was well aware that public sentiment among workers was turning against him. By September, the army joined the rebellion, forcing Perón to relinquish power and flee the country. With Perón's departure, even Eva Perón's coffin was not spared. Her immense significance to the Argentine people made her a potent symbol, and subsequent governments feared her influence even in death. Her coffin was stolen from the memorial where it was kept, though it was never destroyed, merely hidden away. The theft of Eva's coffin gave rise to a host of eerie rumors. One story tells of an officer named Eduardo Arandia, who, under mysterious circumstances, killed his wife one night before taking his own life. Another tale describes a female soldier tasked with guarding the coffin who allegedly went mad after witnessing something inexplicable, prompting the government to cover the coffin with a red cloth. After Perón's exile, the governments that succeeded him repeated many of the same mistakes that had plagued Argentina before his rise. Over the next decade and a half, Argentina endured 6 military coups, with 11 of those 18 years spent under military dictatorship. For ordinary Argentinians, life became increasingly disheartening. Each new government seemed to outdo the last in disappointing the populace, prompting many to joke bitterly that every new administration was the worst they had ever experienced. By 1972, Argentina's GDP growth rate ranked 3rd worst in Latin America, and inflation had skyrocketed to a staggering 80%. While some critics labeled Perón and Eva populists, Argentinians could clearly distinguish between leaders who had their best interests at heart and those who did not. In 1973, after 18 years in exile, Perón returned to Argentina from Spain and was once again elected president. However, his second tenure was tragically brief. He passed away from illness just a year later. Despite their deaths, both Perón and Eva remain enduring icons in Argentine culture. Every year on July 26th, crowds gather to honor Eva's memory, carrying her image through the streets in heartfelt tribute. Even today, the name Perón holds unparalleled significance in Argentina. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to our channel.